Louisiana is often sold as a land of jazz music, mysterious swamps, and cities full of character. But far from New Orleans and Baton Rouge, there is another Louisiana that rarely gets talked about. Small towns slowly falling apart, not because of a single major disaster, but because time has simply moved on without them. In these places, cheap houses are not a sign of opportunity, but a sign that no one is coming. Jobs are scarce, incomes are low, and the sense of safety grows thinner year after year. This list is not about bad towns, but about small communities trapped in a mix of fragile economies, chronic poverty, and levels of crime that feel heavy for places their size. On the map, Alexandria looks like a safe city. It is a regional hub in central Louisiana with a large hospital, a small airport, and a relatively low unemployment rate, around 3%. But that number is misleading. Behind it, the median household income sits at only about $47,000 a year, well below the national average, and more than a quarter of residents live below the poverty line. The city works, but it does not offer a clear path upward. Another problem emerges after dark. Alexandria's violent crime rate is multiple times higher than the national average, turning personal safety into a costly concern. Jobs do exist, but most are low-wage service positions with little room for career growth. Younger generations see this reality and choose to leave. Alexandria once pinned its hopes on England Air Force Base. When the base closed, the city lost its economic engine, and to this day, it has never truly found a replacement. If Alexandria is a city that stopped growing, Mansura is a town that never really got the chance to move forward. With a population of around 1,200 people, Mansura operates on a much smaller and more fragile scale. Its median household income is only about $21,000 a year, placing it far below national living standards. Here, working hard does not always translate into a better life. Unlike Alexandria, Mansura's main issue is not extreme crime. Its numbers hover around the Louisiana average. But that is exactly the point. Even without high crime, life in Mansura still feels heavy because there are almost no job options. Local employment is limited to small retail, basic services, and low-paying work. For better opportunities, people have to leave, and many do. Ironically, Mansura sits in fertile agricultural land, yet the richness of the soil has never truly lifted the people who live on it. Is known as the tamale capital of Louisiana, hosting the Zwolle Tamale Fiesta every year. Outside of that celebration, however, its economic pulse fades quickly. The median household income is only around $30,000 a year, well below both the Louisiana and national averages. The impact is immediate. Poverty levels are extremely high, affecting roughly 1/3 of the population, and home values remain low, signaling weak buying power and minimal new investment. With only about 1,600 residents, Zwolle is not facing a dramatic collapse. What it faces is the absence of a future. Local jobs are limited to basic services, small businesses, and remnants of agricultural activity. For stable or well-paying work, residents must commute to other towns, a distance that is not always realistic for everyone. As a result, Zwolle slowly loses its younger generation, replaced by an aging population and an economy stuck in place. Duson presents another picture of a small town that looks quiet on the surface but is slowly slipping backward. With a population of around 1,400 people, it once felt like a peaceful rural oasis. Recent numbers, however, tell a very different story. The median household income sits at just about $24,330 a year, roughly 1/3 of the national average. Poverty is widespread, with nearly 39% of residents living below the poverty line. In terms of safety, Duson is not a headline-grabbing crime hotspot like many cities labeled the worst, but the data is still troubling. Overall crime rates are higher than in most U.S. cities, and by national safety indexes, Duson is considered safer than only about 17% of American towns. That means the risk of becoming a crime victim, while not extreme, is very real. The local economy relies heavily on low-wage jobs in service, food, and care industries, with very limited paths for upward mobility. Vivian feels like stepping into a town that once had momentum, but is now fighting just to stay afloat. With a population of roughly 3,000 people, the city faces serious economic strain. Median household income is only about $22,600 a year, far below both the national and Louisiana averages, and has shown signs of stagnation or even decline in recent years. Nearly half of the population lives below the poverty line. Most local jobs in Vivian are low-paying, concentrated in service or clerical work, with few opportunities for long-term career growth. Commutes are often lengthy, with many residents spending more than 30 minutes just to reach the nearest job center. Vivian is known for having a strong sense of community identity and access to local history and culture, but its economic numbers tell a much harsher story. White Castle looks like a classic small town along the Mississippi River, quiet, with rows of modest homes and a strong sense of local history. In reality, it is far from peaceful. The median household income in White Castle is only about $19,300 a year, roughly 1/3 of the national average, and more than half of its residents live below the poverty line, far exceeding both state and national averages. These economic struggles are closely tied to alarming crime statistics. In 2024, the violent crime rate in White Castle stood at around 1,576 incidents per 100,000 residents. When combined with property crimes such as theft and robbery, total crime reached more than 4,224 incidents per 100,000 people. Its crime index is well above the national average, making the risk of victimization a daily reality. Despite not being a large urban area, White Castle faces a heavy combination of extreme poverty, low income, and high crime that creates constant social and economic pressure on its residents. Moving slightly north from White Castle, we arrive in Bunkie, a small town in Avoyelles Parish that feels like a snapshot of rural economic struggle. Household income here is extremely low, around $21,600 per year according to the latest census, less than half the national average. More than half of the population lives below the poverty line. Another factor weighing heavily on Bunkie's reputation is crime. Local analyses give the town an overall F grade for both violent and property crime, with the risk of becoming a victim considered significant, ranging in some areas from about 1 in 13 to 1 in 23 residents. That is far worse than in many U.S. towns. Demographically, Bunkie's population is slowly shrinking, reflecting a familiar pattern: younger residents leaving in search of better opportunities elsewhere. Ironically, the town was once an important railroad hub, but today its local economy shows little sign of that former relevance. After Bunkie, Cottonport feels smaller, but the pressure is no lighter. With a population of roughly 2,000 people, the town has a median household income of about $33,000 per year, among the lowest in Louisiana. Nearly half of its residents live below the poverty line, making daily life highly vulnerable to price increases and the lack of stable jobs. Most local work is low-paying and limited, forcing many residents to rely on assistance or long commutes just to make ends meet. In terms of crime, Cottonport is often misunderstood. Its absolute crime numbers are not extreme, with total crime rates estimated around 1,300 to 1,400 incidents per 100,000 residents, lower than the Louisiana average. But in a national context, the town ranks around the 13th percentile for safety, meaning only about 13% of U.S. cities are considered worse. Combined with a fragile economy, even a single serious crime can have an outsized impact on a community this small. Ironically, Cottonport once functioned as an important river port. Compared to the quiet of Cottonport, Greensburg feels like a town truly abandoned by time. With a population of around 600 people, it is one of the smallest parish seats in the United States, and that extreme scale only amplifies its problems. Greensburg carries the title of parish capital, a status that usually brings stability. Here, it is not enough. Greensburg is a town that remains administratively alive, but economically almost motionless. The most striking issue is unemployment. Rates are often cited around 20% or higher, a clear sign of how few real job opportunities exist. The local economy relies almost entirely on parish government and a handful of small businesses. There is no major industry, no nearby regional job center, and alternative employment often requires long-distance travel. If the previous towns collapsed because they were too small and too quiet, Bogalusa is collapsing because the weight it carries is simply too heavy for a town this size. With a population of around 10,000, Bogalusa is big enough to have big city problems, but far too small to have big city solutions. Median household income sits at roughly $37,000 a year, and about 1/3 of residents live in poverty, creating constant economic pressure. What truly sets Bogalusa apart, however, is crime. Total crime rates hover around 5,300 incidents per 100,000 people, with violent crime more than 3 times the national average. In Bogalusa, feeling unsafe is not the exception, it is part of daily life. The irony is that Bogalusa was once a prosperous lumber town. When that industry collapsed, nothing of equal scale replaced it. Today, the city still stands physically, but its economic foundation and sense of security have eroded. That is what places Bogalusa among Louisiana's worst small towns. Not one single issue, but everything unraveling at the same time. Opelousas. It's a small city living with the intensity of big city problems. With a population of around 15,000, it is too large to be considered a village, yet too fragile to carry its social burdens. Median household income is roughly $32,000 a year, well below the national average, while poverty remains high, especially in the city's core neighborhoods. What pushes Opelousas onto the list of worst small towns is its per capita crime rate. For a city this size, crime, particularly violent crime, is alarmingly high, making the risk of victimization feel real in everyday life. Many neighborhoods operate on constant vigilance rather than small-town trust. Ironically, Opelousas has a rich cultural legacy as one of the birthplaces of Louisiana's Zydeco music. But cultural heritage alone has not been enough to counter poverty, crime, and long-term economic stagnation. If Opelousas is weighed down by big city problems, Marksville is a small town hit by a fragile economy and a steadily eroding sense of safety. Marksville is home to Paragon Casino, one of the area's largest employers. Yet the presence of a casino has not been enough to lift the broader community. The result is a town with limited activity, high social pressure, and difficult long-term prospects. With a population of around 4,800, Marksville's median household income is about $33,000 a year, still far below the national average. Poverty levels remain elevated, and local job options are dominated by low-wage service work and small-scale government positions, leaving economic mobility largely stagnant. Marksville frequently appears on worst town lists due to its high violent crime rate relative to its size. In a community this small, even a single serious incident can shake the entire town. Bastrop feels heavy. This small town in Morehouse Parish is home to around 8,900 people, yet it carries problems usually associated with much larger cities. Median household income sits in the low $30,000 range, far below the national average, while poverty rates hover near or exceed 1/3 of the population. Local job options are limited, dominated by low-wage service work with very few real paths for economic mobility. What truly sets Bastrop apart is crime. For a town this small, crime rates, especially violent crime, are far above the national average, creating a constant sense of insecurity across many neighborhoods. In a small city, the impact is magnified. A single serious incident can shift how the entire community feels overnight. If Bastrop is weighed down by crime and stagnation, Ville Platte represents a small town slowly collapsing from within. Ville Platte is known as a center of Cajun culture and traditional music, but a strong cultural identity has not been enough to mask daily reality. Chronic poverty, limited opportunity, and an environment that feels increasingly difficult to live in. With a population of about 6,100, Ville Platte's median household income is roughly $28,000 a year, well below the national average. Poverty levels are extremely high, often cited near or above 40%, placing it among the most economically strained towns in Louisiana. Local employment is largely confined to basic services, small healthcare facilities, and low-paying jobs, without any real economic engine driving growth. Crime further compounds these challenges. For a town of this size, per capita crime, especially violent crime, is high enough that the sense of small-town safety is largely absent. Unlike the other small towns on this list, Donaldsonville has both size and history that should have given it better odds. With a population of around 7,000, it was once Louisiana's first state capital and sits in a strategic location along the Mississippi River. Today, that history feels more like a burden than an advantage. Median household income is in the low $24,000 range, still far below the national average, and poverty remains widespread across many of the city's older neighborhoods. Donaldsonville's biggest problem is crime. Statistics suggest the chance of becoming a crime victim is around 1 in 176, a significant figure for a town this size. Property crime and violent crime continue to erode any sense of safety, particularly in the aging downtown areas. Job opportunities are also limited, forcing many residents to rely on river-related industries or commute long distances toward the Baton Rouge area.